Okay. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about data collection. Okay. And today we're going to present Nadia and me, Ceci. Well, for data collection, it's important for you to remember that when you try to collect data, social scientists make use of a number of different data collection strategies. For example, experiments and quasi-experiments. These ones are really important because normally involve research designs that give them the chance to infer in a strong and casual way. And number two, surveys using structured questionnaires. And these ones are also important because this is a way to collect data that involves a large number of variables from a large number of respondents. And finally, the number three, within a qualitative research design, that this way of collecting data involves collecting a lot of data on a rather small, and some techniques of using in this method can be depth interviews, participants observations, or focus groups. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain what are you going to listen about primary data. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to explain what is primary data and how can we use primary data, the qualitative and quantitative data, and a little bit about the social survey. Okay. Nadia, can you please go to the other one? Okay, so the primary data is data collected from a specific research problem at hand, using procedures that can fit the best into the research problem. Data can be used for the description of contemporary and historical attributes, and this can be compared with research in replication of organizational research, reanalysis. This one can involve asking new questions of the data that we are not originally addressed, and research design and methodological advancement. And finally, teaching and learning. Data sets collected by university-based research, and these ones are often achieved by data achieves. One major primary data collection strategy is that the experiment, when we are experiment, you should know that as a research, you are in control of the participants, and in this experiment, also the research manipulates one or more independent variables following planning design and observes the effects of the independent variables on the development variable. Now I'm gonna talk about the social survey, okay? And something also that you need to remember is that you have a strong control over the design and procedure of these surveys or data, and the outcome of an experiment permits casual interpretation. The social survey, is a second established primary data strategy in the interview survey. And also you must know that in a survey, or in this survey, you have a large and representative samples and explicit defined target population, and that it's interview. Also, 11 standardized questions are asked and the responses are coded. Also, the surveys are applied when the researchers are interested in collecting information about observations, attitudes, feelings, and experiences, and opinions about the population that the experiment is being taken care of. Okay, now, the qualitative research. First of all, we need to remember that when we are talking about qualitative data, we are referring as collecting data that involves the understanding of the complexity, detail, and the context of the research in progress. This data might include tests about interviews, transcriptions, notes, and audiovisual material. And now now that I already explained this, what is a qualitative data, I'm going to explain what does a qualitative research refers to into the primary data collection. Qualitative research examine how people learn about and make sense of themselves and others, and how they structure and give meaning to their daily lives. Okay, now I'm gonna talk about solicited and spontaneous data. Okay. One of the disadvantages of soliciting information from this research subject is that the research subjects are aware that they're taking part of the scientific study, and this might affect your investigation. However, the good thing, or one of the advantages, is that as a researcher, you can design the data collection. I'm sorry. Okay. Following now following to the thing that I already explained. Okay. As I mentioned, you're gonna design the data collection, but also you are going to provide information that has given in the research question. And some of the information you might get in the primary data can be as the following examples. And if you pay attention in this summary, if you read the reading, you're gonna notice that we have a chart where you can see the quantitative and the qualitative research and what are the results that you're gonna obtain. For example, in the qualitative research, you might have interview surveys, mail surveys, structured diaries, and a web survey, and also spontaneously, you might monitor the research, you may observe it, and you can administrate your records. And for the qualitative research, you might have an open interview, a focus group, and an unstructured diary. And from these, you might observe that the participants, you might find existing records, sound, or images. Okay, remember that the qualitative research, sometimes people have already investigated about the topic that you wanna talk about, and that's why you might find this kind of information that can be useful for you. Okay, and now Nadia is going to explain to you about the secondary data. Sorry.
Thank you, Ceci. Okay, so I will be talking about secondary data collection. First of all, what is secondary data collection? Secondary data analysis involves the analysis of an existing data set, which had previously been collected by another researcher, usually for a different research question. Okay, so in this part, after the primary data collection happens, as Ceci mentioned, then that research and all of that data goes into an archive, and you can collect it from there and to help your own research if it is in the same topic or in a similar research question. Okay, so then we can use secondary data collection for the description of contemporary and historical attributes, comparative research or replication of the original research, reanalysis, which is asking new questions of the data that were not originally addressed. Then we have research design and methodological advancement. And last, teaching and learning. Okay, for teaching and learning, you can use secondary data to bring it into your classroom as a teacher, and you can show it to your students. So that's one of the uses. Now, quantitative and qualitative data. Even that mostly it was quantitative because it manages a lot of that type of data. But lately, there have been more examples of qualitative data in archives. Now, for quantitative secondary data, we find a lot of this type of examples. The information consists of studied objects whose characteristics are coded in variables that have a range of possible values. Okay, quite quantitative data and numbers and all that stuff. But what is more of our interest is qualitative secondary data. And a qualitative database consists of documents or video cassette tapes. Well, maybe not right now. Maybe right now is more like recordings and stuff. And the transcripts of those tapes or those recordings. Also includes photographs, diaries, and other things. Now, give me a second because this got stuck. Sorry, my laptop is quite really slow. Hold on. Oh my God. Okay, sorry for the confusion. I had a little bit of a technical problem. So what I was saying, qualitative secondary data consists of these documents, audio cassettes, tapes, transcripts, photographs, diaries, and so on. Okay, now, here are some qualities of valuable qualitative data. The first one is the interviewees have been chosen on a convincing sampling basis. The second one, the interviews follow a life story form rather than focus on the researcher's immediate themes. And the third one, you have the option to recontact the interviewees. It is not rolled out. Okay, so you have to follow these little qualities. You have to find secondary data that follows these qualities. So it is easier for you to make your rationale when it comes to your own research. Okay, now here are some advantages of using secondary data. The first one is saving in relation to resources, time, money, and personnel. So if you gather some secondary data, it already has this research, so you don't have to waste that much time in finding questionnaires and finding personnel that might help you with your research or your own time, okay? So, but you have to be really careful when you choose your secondary data. Now, the second one, increase data quality. As I will mention in a few slides, it is quite difficult to get your primary data to go to an archive. So it has to be really good quality. So that's why it will have good quality if you use it. Now, the third one, you have a larger sample size. The fourth one, the secondary analyst is also able to research topics and or time periods that they would not otherwise have access to. For example, if you want to include something from the past, you cannot go to the past. So you can use that secondary data to help your research. Now, some disadvantages. First one, the location and accessibility of data. It might be difficult to find good secondary data, as I will mention also in a few slides. And the second one, understanding the data set. I don't know if you have seen one of those research, but sometimes the researcher uses codes and different types of methods to help them present their information without making it too difficult for themselves or for others. But every researcher just does it in a different way. So it might be difficult to understand. Then we have the number 3, different purposes of data collection. For example, you have a purpose with your research and the secondary data might be different. So it's kind of difficult to match them. Then we have these sample issues. For sample issues, I found that it is related to the size of the sample, and it might be difficult to make it smaller or to have groups. Sorry. So yeah, then we have the data quality. In this case, I will mention go in depth on that later, but it is difficult to find one that is good because there are many archives, but there are also other sources in internet, and it's quite hard to find one that is good and that fits your research. Then we have number 6, meaning and context gets lost. For example, if you use a secondary data set, they might not mention something like gestures or the context of their research. So many interpretations can come into the research if you don't have that information. And for last disadvantage, we have the ethical issues. For example, in a primary research, you make an agreement with your interviewees or your subjects. And when someone else uses that secondary data set, it might be difficult to hide the identity of your subjects. So there might be ethical issues. Now, let's see, how do we find useful secondary data? With a search strategy. We have the sources of information, as I was saying before, the official data archives. These are organizations established for the purpose of acquiring, archiving, and disseminating data for secondary research. Nowadays, archives usually store electronic data, which is really good because we live in a digital era. And they have catalogs that contain information on the subject of the original study, the data collection mode used, the number of variables, and the number of subjects. This is really important. If you want to use secondary data, you need to have all of this information. So it is easier for you to make your rationale. Now, what happens next? You need to obtain a detailed description of the study. Well-documented data sets come with a detailed description of the methods and procedures used to collect the data. As I mentioned, it's quite important that you have all of this, but it's difficult to read because every researcher has their own ways of doing it. And it is quite difficult for them to share everything. Now, there are other data sets besides the archival records. To find them, we have to use a method of tracing. You have to strategy and have a really good use of keywords. And if that doesn't work, you can always have a meta search program. With these ones, what you do is they gather the information from other searchers, and they make a little list. So you have a lot of options that are good, better quality than what you would find in a regular searcher. One of those is called Copernic, one of those meta search programs, if you would like to try it. Then we have that you have to judge the usefulness of what you find, which is quite difficult because some of them are poorly documented as they are not in an official archival data set. And you need to have a projective ability to assess the data quality, which is not easy, especially for us that we are novice researcher, but it's not impossible. Then we need to have the criterion of practicality. If it is useful for you, if it would take more time for you to analyze the data and try to find it and try to make it clean, it might be better not to use it. And we have this of meta information, which is information that describes the data and thus enables methodological quality assessment. It is an important requirement in selecting potentially interesting secondary data sets. Okay, so now we have retrieving secondary data. Once you find your data, mostly in official databases, you need to ask for it, okay? And they can send it to you via the internet or as files on CD-ROM or data. I don't think that happens anymore, but maybe they do. I think it is easier to send them via email or another way lately. But yeah. Now, there are some conditions. Once you have your data, for some different researchers, you have different conditions. if you found it in official archives, some are free. You can get them, download them, whatever you need. And others might be expensive because maybe the researcher, the primary researcher, wants to make up for the money he spent, or he or she spent on the research. And then we have the conditions for the use of the data. Some are restricted to the researcher who requested it, which could be yourself. Then you have that the original study and data archive must be cited. That's the only condition for some. And others ask you to ask permission for the original investigator directly. And if you find your secondary data in not an official archive, you have to locate the original investigator, maybe by yourself. In these other ones, the archive will help you or give you the address or whatever, the email address. But in a not official, you have to find them yourself. Then we have that locating information about the original data collection might be difficult because, as I mentioned before, they don't have a full data set like well structured sometimes, so it might be complicated. Now we have the formats in which you can find your secondary data. The most common one is a text ASCII file. And in these ones, the data is organized as a rectangular data matrix, and it comes with a code book. This is really important because there you can find how the researcher, the original researcher, used all of the information, how they classify it and everything. Another type is SPSS and SAS. And the data might be organized also in a hierarchical and relational way. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Now, you have to evaluate the methodological quality of the secondary data. You have to consider carefully whether the data is appropriately fits the research question. You cannot choose, you can find data, secondary data that is quite interesting, but if it doesn't fit your research question, it doesn't work. You cannot make your research question fit the data. Okay, so that would be all for us. Here are references. And yeah, if you want to try it, go ahead. I think it would be interesting to see some people using secondary data. And that would be all for us.
Thank you
Thank you
guys.
for
Have a wonderful day. Bye.